Speaker Pangelinan.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it's very, very obvious that the issue that is to be addressed here is really a very personal issue that touches upon a segment of our community that I really, have no personal stake in it. I think that this personally affects the lives of women in our community, of course, families with husbands and boyfriends and relationships of women of childbearing age that may be faced with this type of decision and their ability to access medical care, including what has been determined to be the law of the land, the right to access the termination of that pregnancy, provided they meet the parameters of our Constitution and the rights affirmed to women by law in our country and by that extension, our island. And it touches the lives of doctors who spend untold years and almost at times unsurmountable debt to go into the art of the practice of medicine to render medical care as a profession, an avocation, and as a service to the people in the communities that they invest in and putting up practices to provide that medical service, both in areas that are underserved, as Guam is, and the ability of our community to attract service of these doctors to provide and make adequate care available at the minimum to our community residents. And so the issue is both emotional for the families and those that are affected of it, the women, economical in some respects to the doctors that decide where they're going to practice, where they feel that they have the protection of law to ensure that they can practice medicine according to what they spent years and years and years working on, studying for, and rendering. And when we have laws that, in my opinion, and the opinion of the doctors, much more importantly, the opinions of the doctors themselves, feel that it inhibits their ability to practice and it places great risk, both personal and family, for themselves, then we need to take a look at those laws and make a determination whether we in here consider what's at stake for all of these segments of our community and try to balance what exists in law today to provide the protection for the women and the babies that are born live after an attempt at a termination that results in a live birth. And other existing statutes that provide the remedies necessary to protect those women and those babies that are born live in an attempted termination. And from what I can tell from the testimonies provided, that we do have adequate laws in place both at the federal and the local level that protects the rights of these women and the rights of these families to not only ensure that when the attempted termination of that pregnancy results in a live birth, then not only have the doctors come together in this community and looked at and studied policies necessary to guide their practices, for example, in this case at Guam Memorial Hospital, where these doctors are credentialed and in order to practice in the community, they also are credentialed at the hospital and have to provide services at the hospital and are guided by those rules, regulations, and laws in the carrying out of their duty for their specialties, that it exists there as well. And these were developed, of course, by the doctors themselves, who understand what the risks are and what would be necessarily correct and proper remediation an action that must be taken, not should be taken, but must be taken by themselves and those involved in the process of providing that service that is a right to a woman for the decision she makes with regards to what happens to her pregnancy. And so it kind of, for me, means that we're coming in here now and negating all of that according to the doctors, according to the interpretation of the existing statutes, according to what these doctors have agreed to, that in order to practice medicine at Guam Memorial Hospital, they will bind their practices and their decisions in rendering the appropriate care should a termination of a pregnancy result in a live birth. And so, while I fully support that that care must be given, as well as the doctors who presented testimony fully support that that care must be given, they believe that what is being presented to us in the legislation before this body today interferes with that and is unnecessary, and that what occurs and what puts their ability to practice what is in their professional training at stake, that the determinations and what are the requirements of the statute here go far and beyond what is necessary to provide that medical care that must be rendered to a live birth that results from an unsuccessful termination of a pregnancy. That all the parameters are there to ensure these protections to the families, to the baby, to the doctors, and to the community. And so I look at what this presents, and I feel that considering all of those issues as I look at them, they continue to remain consistent with my personal position on this matter, even though I don't have a personal stake in it. But I do have a stake in it as a member of this body that will set the policy for our communities, and considering all of the interests involved for those that will be affected by the policy that we are being presented to enact in Bill 195. And I don't believe that it's balanced, and I don't believe that it renders anything additional, with the exception of putting members of our community at risk. That if for whatever reason, which is what we have seen has occurred in the past, when the protection of that woman's right to make a decision regarding her birth and the ultimate outcome of her pregnancy, and that she wishes to exercise her right to make that decision within the guidelines. It's not an unfettered decision. It's not a decision that ignores the right of what results and when what occurs with that pregnancy results in the need for this country and the need for lawmaking bodies to step in and say, there is a point when you no longer have that right. So it's not an unlimited right, and the women have come to recognize that and accept that. That at some point, there has to be protection rendered to the fetus. So we're not doing anything at all here that changes that there is protection guaranteed to that fetus. But at certain point, that right does not exist and belongs completely to the woman and to those that she consults with, her doctor, her pastor, her husband, her boyfriend, her family, but it leaves that outside the realm of the government, in which the government does not, and I believe should not, have a right to step in and interfere at that point until this government has set the policy of when there's a community interest in protecting that fetus. And everybody has come to accept that. What this will result is that the government is stepping into that element where it already says you don't have a place. That doesn't belong, government doesn't belong in that time frame for that decision. And when you inject government into that time frame, what you will have is an interference of that personal right that the woman has, confined with how broad she wants to make that decision be influenced. But it's her decision on who should influence her doing those decisions. It shouldn't be the government, and it shouldn't be the law. And when that occurs, Mr. Speaker, and until the government had stepped in and provided that point at which that decision must be taken out of that time frame and that realm, and must recognize then the fetus and the rights now that are attached to that fetus as they move on to the completion of that pregnancy, then we provide all the protections available. When this country did not make that decision, we had horrendous experience with what happened to women when that appropriate medical care was made available to them, when that professional medical care was made available to them. And we had a greater waste of human life then than we do now. This takes us back to those dark days and back alleys, when doctors, because of what we are proposing in here, are no longer going to feel comfortable or may want to place everything that they've worked for all their lives at risk to provide what is constitutionally a right to that woman to get professional medical care in her decision of what to do with her pregnancy. And so I just think that the way that the bill is written and what it proposes doesn't advance, in my opinion, the protections, because all of those protections already are in law. What it does is it opens that door that we have closed that have resulted in greater protection for what is constitutionally guaranteed for both mother and fetus as they proceed with what has occurred when a pregnancy occurs. And so it opens up that door for us to go backwards instead of us to move forward. And I don't think that presents to me a way that we should move forward on this thing without additional and greater thought on this issue and this matter. There will be disagreements, and there are disagreements. That is why every year we have members of our community in our nation and right here locally continually push for this issue on making that determination. And unfortunately, what determines for us of where our limits are is the Constitution, fortunately or unfortunately. And until we make those changes in the Constitution, then I think we have to continue to recognize what we call precedents in regards to how we can proceed with our own issues, our own moral dilemmas on how do we handle this. And those are debated under the legal structure that we have in the cases that are brought forth for reconsideration in the Congress, and when it happens in the Congress, for affirmation in the courts as to what is constitutional and what we are allowed to do in the interference and the limits that we place on our public citizens in their personal lives. And I think this goes beyond that. And we have advocates every single year, every single day, that advocate on a personal basis to try and convince our policymakers to go one way or the other to take that additional step, and results in bills like this. This is, I don't begrudge this bill coming forward. That is the advocacy that is also guaranteed by the Constitution. Advocacies for such issues as this, we must recognize and guard just as jealously as we recognize and guard what is already in statute that gives rights to individuals whose rights are going to be affected by this statute. I fully support bills like this coming forth. I just want to ensure that when the debate is done and the considerations are all discussed, that we don't step beyond the boundaries of what we are in here for and what we should be ultimately guided by. And that is what the legal authority, as reflected in the Constitution and amendments to the Constitution and the decisions of the court that guide those constitutional principles and sets limits and parameters on the constitutional benefits, on how far we can go in injecting government and its limits and its restrictions on things that are clearly provided in the Constitution under their private domain. And when we see clearly that it interferes with that, then the decision, no matter what our personal and moral position should be or is, that we have to also make sure that that is, if not the top, at the top of weighing ourselves. And if our intention is to challenge that, then there's a better bill that we can do to challenge that. This is not to do it. I mean, there's a better bill that should challenge that and settle that issue and settle that matter. Because some bills are introduced for the singular purpose of challenging the constitutional principles and ensuring that that bill passed by the local body moves up the ladder till it gets to the Supreme Court or the Congress and they arbitrate. And I just think that if this is the bill, then it doesn't accomplish that. It's not wide enough. It's not deep enough. And what it does, once again, is that until such time that we get there, it's almost non-enforceable. Non-enforceable. And if all we're doing is making that public statement, then maybe that's the basis of our vote. But if we're truly interested in protecting and advancing and ensuring that our local laws remain consistent with federal laws and constitutional principles, then we can't go with this bill. Because the unintended consequences of it, as I mentioned, drives women back to those dark days, which puts their lives at risk. the fetus who may be born in those back alleys and backdoor clinics presents greater risk of not being able to provide the service necessary to save that fetus life that results from an unsuccessful termination because of what this places at risk. And so, Mr. Speaker, I once again reiterate that I have no objections, no problem facing the decision that I'm being asked to face today with Bill 195, because that is the right of advocacy, and I fully respect all of those individuals who support and advocate for this policy. I just wish that they would grant the respect that we all deserve in the dilemma that faces us when we are asked to make the final decision on these things. You know, I received an email from a lady who I have seen her over the years. She is fervently in support of this. But the heartening thing about it is, you know, when she sent me an email, she just thanked me. She thanked me for seeing that in all the years, and she's been an advocate for this. This is not the first bill dealing with this kind of issue that's come before this body. But she said, Senator Pangelinan, I just want to thank you because over all the years that I've seen you address these issues that were presented to you, I have seen you never begrudge us because our advocacy results in you having to make a decision. I thank you for struggling with the matter. I have seen the personal anguish in your face, in your articulation of your position on these things, in injecting your personal experiences with this. I have a nephew who's 23 years, I don't know how old it is. He is, I think he's 26, 25. 3.5 pound preemie. At one time, the youngest baby ever born here. And that was a personal decision, and don't think that my family didn't struggle with what the ultimate decision of that, because truly there was a risk for both parent and fetus at that time. And our family gathered around her. She made her decision. We accepted what the final outcome could be, and we supported her. And thankfully and gratefully, by the grace of God and the mercy of all of our petitions, he's 26. Yeah. Would this have done anything for him? No. No, not at all. The right to make sure that that child or that fetus was protected is there in statute. Doesn't need this law today. They're telling us that the story about, yes, the same laws exist today as being told under that story. The same laws that resulted in all that is all in there right now to make sure that happens again. So maybe, Mr. Speaker, I think that one of the things that I would like to maybe have the body consider for amendment is that perhaps the doctors have said that their practice, their protocols, their professional evaluation of all of the issues relating to how do you treat a live birth are all embedded in the rules and regulations, or the Guam Hospital credentialing departmental rules and regulations. Maybe that's what we should allow, that be adopted as the standard for when care should be available and appropriate and exercised by the doctors. Let those professionals make that decision as they have already come together. So I'm not sure where that would be, Mr. Speaker. I would maybe just defer that I be given a little bit more time. We can continue the discussion. I don't mind listening. And then just be given an opportunity to make that possible. If I can write it up and be satisfied with it, I would like to reserve a little bit of time to possibly make that amendment later.
Because of the gravity of this issue, the chair will allow you to have a second opportunity to be recognized.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I have Speaker Wampat and any other senator wish to be heard.